just a few moments, this body will vote on a bill that actually doesn't limit abortion at all. Doesn't slow down one abortion, doesn't stop one woman from choosing to have an abortion, doesn't have a nationwide ban on abortion. In fact, this is a bill about what happens after an abortion. What's unique about this bill is it's asking a pretty simple question that seems like it would be a common ground issue for us. If there is, in this case, a medical mistake that didn't take a life, we normally think about a medical mistake that takes a life, but in this case, if there was a medical mistake that actually protected a life, what happens? This doesn't limit one single abortion in America, though many people in this body know me well enough to know I'd love to protect more children in America. This bill just asks the simple question, if an abortion is botched and the child is delivered instead of destroyed in the womb, and the child is alive and viable on the table, what happens next? Current medical practice is everyone in the room just backs away and you allow the child to die on the table. I don't think that's what most Americans would want. I think most Americans would say, hey, I've got boundaries on the issue of abortion, and definitely fully born is a boundary. Now, it's been interesting. I've listened to the debate yesterday and today from my Democratic colleagues, many of them friends. We have a real disagreement on this. This is not extreme, as I've heard it described, an extreme or right-wing proposal about abortion. I just don't think if I pulled 100 people off the street and said, hey, if a child is alive and screaming on the table after birth, what do you think we should do? I bet 100 out of 100 of them would say we should probably give them medical care. I just don't think that's extreme or out of the main thought in America. I think that's just who Americans are. We're compassionate people. That when we see a baby and look in their face, we don't say ignore them. We say let's provide some care. I've heard some of my colleagues say that we should respect the rights of women in this. By the way, I think one of those women should be that little girl that's born, who she is lying on the table right there crying. I think she should get some compassion and respect as well, because a decision is being made at this point about what to do. And it's not a theory. Several of my colleagues yesterday have used terms during this debate like, this is myth-based fear-mongering. That was my favorite one. Republicans are talking about stories that do not happen, was also expressed by another one of my colleagues. This one was just a little more blunt. One of my colleagues just came to the floor and said, Republicans are lying. Well, here's what really happened. Let me just give you a stat. This doesn't happen very often at all. Thankfully, this is rare. But the CDC does some tracking, and there's, quite frankly, now only 8 states in America that actually keep track of this. That if there's a botched abortion, the child is actually delivered fully alive. There's only 8 states that do it. Most states say don't. In fact, what was interesting is we tried to be able to track which states actually keep track of this and have some kind of instruction of what to do on health care on it. A few states do. Many states don't. In fact, some states like Minnesota literally voted recently, we used to track reporting, but we don't want to even know anymore if this occurs. Don't tell us if it occurs. Of the few states, just 8, that actually tracked this, over a several-year period, there were 277 cases like this where a child was actually delivered and was alive after a botched abortion. Now, again, that's not many, but we know from 8 states in that short time period that that's occurring. So again, I go back to the basic question, what do we want to do about that? Do we want to just ignore that? Or do we have a thought about what should happen to that child? Some of my colleagues have said this only occurs if there's a pregnancy complication and the child was already going to die, or there was a fatal medical condition that was actually occurring. Well, actually, that's not true in this bill. This bill is about a viable child that was delivered late term that's now on the table alive. I've also heard that this is going to have this massive overreach for doctors, that they're going to be oppressed and they're going to be afraid to practice on this. Actually, the bill's pretty clear on this. This still gives the doctor able to use his or her professional judgment on the care that would normally be provided to a child that's born. That's it. Now, the doctor may look at it and say, this child's not going to make it. That's still a professional judgment that's there. Or they may have a professional judgment that the child will make it. And as I've mentioned on this floor before, there are adults walking around today that survived an abortion, like Melissa Oden and other folks that I know personally. So this is not something that just never occurs. So it doesn't limit abortion. It doesn't restrict doctors. It actually does happen, contrary to what some of my colleagues have said, that this never happens. It actually does happen on this. I've had colleagues that have said infanticide is already illegal. This is unnecessary. That's been another part of it. So let's move on. This is unnecessary, except we've also established the issue that, yes, taking the life of that child on the table. Literally, once that child is on the table crying, they can't reach in and take the life of that child. That's Kermit Gosnell, horrific stuff. But just allowing them to slowly die, that is still protected. So that's not there. One of my colleagues came to this floor and made this statement: at the center of this debate is whether we believe in the premise from the Declaration of Independence that all are created equal, that freedom belongs to everyone, and that women deserve to be treated as equal citizens. I actually couldn't agree more with my colleague, because that same Declaration of Independence, right next to that statement about everyone being created equal, also includes a simple little comment that says, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And our question on this particular bill is, when that child is born and she's crying on the table, does she have the opportunity for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, or not? That's all this bill does. This bill should be a simple process to say, this is not who we are as Americans. As Americans, we respect the opportunity for life for that child. That's fully delivered. And then we determine what we're going to do. Just because a baby can't defend herself doesn't mean she's disposable. It means she's vulnerable. And that means we as a nation should determine what we're going to do with the life of the most vulnerable. Mr. President, I encourage a yes vote on this. This should be a bipartisan conversation where we speak from this body for those who cannot speak for themselves. I yield the floor.